Please, nurse my pup, the Alpha King begged as the weak Omega's scent calmed his air. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, back to our main characters. The moon hung low in the night sky over the vast wilderness of the Northern Territories, casting its silver light upon the dense forest. In this untamed land, the Alpha King, Heir Thornridge, stood at the edge of a clearing, his piercing silver eyes scanning the horizon with a mixture of concern and resolve. His strong frame was a silhouette against the darkness, a figure of both strength and command. But beneath the hardened exterior, a deep sense of unease gnawed at him. His son, Lucas, the young pup destined to one day take his place, had fallen ill. The curse that had plagued Heir's family for generations seemed to have found its way to the next heir. Heir's heart clenched as he thought of his son, still so young, fighting against the very same darkness that had nearly consumed him. The Alpha's shoulders sagged for a moment before he straightened, his gaze hardening with determination. He would not let the curse take another of his bloodline. He had searched for answers far and wide, but nothing seemed to help. It was in this state of desperation that he had come to the most unlikely of places, the humble cottage of an Omega healer. Emily Stone was a quiet, unassuming woman, a soft scent of lavender and wildflowers clinging to her. She was a healer by nature, her touch gentle yet undeniably powerful. Her reputation as someone who could calm the most troubled spirits had reached even the distant halls of the royal palace. The Alpha King had heard whispers of her abilities, and tonight, he had no choice but to put his faith in them. Emily sat in her small, cozy cottage, her hands carefully tending to a collection of herbs. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the otherwise still room. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Her heart skipped a beat, though she didn't know why. She rose and opened the door to find Heir standing there, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Without a word, he stepped inside, carrying his son in his arms. Lucas, pale and fragile, was barely conscious, his small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Emily's heart went out to the boy, but she knew that this was no ordinary illness. She could feel it in the air, an energy that was heavy with magic and danger. Heir set Lucas down gently on a makeshift cot and turned to Emily, his voice raw with emotion. Please, nurse my pup, he begged, his voice cracking. I cannot lose him. Emily's gaze softened as she knelt beside the child, her fingers brushing against his feverish skin. As her hands moved over him, a calming sensation began to spread, a warmth that seemed to soothe the pain radiating from the pup's body. She felt a deep connection to the boy, an unspoken bond that she couldn't explain. But it was there, undeniable and real. As she worked, the scent of Emily's presence seemed to fill the room, a quiet, comforting aroma that eased the tension in the air. Heir watched in silence, his heart racing as he saw his son's condition slowly begin to improve. Emily's touch was like a lifeline, the healing power of her scent cutting through the fear that had gripped him. For the first time in days, Heir allowed himself to hope. In that moment, he knew he would do anything to protect Emily, anything to ensure that she stayed by his side. But that would come later. Right now, the most important thing was Lucas, and the weak Omega who had just saved his life. As the night deepened, the air inside Emily's cottage grew heavier with the scent of herbs and the subtle, yet undeniable presence of magic. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. Emily continued to tend to the young pup, her fingers glowing with a soft, golden light as they moved across Lucas' delicate form. The fever that had gripped him began to fade, and his shallow breathing became deeper, more stable. Emily's heart beat in a steady rhythm as she worked, an unspoken understanding between her and the pup, as if she had known all along that this moment was meant to happen. The Alpha King stood silent, watching her every move with a mix of awe and gratitude. Heir Thornridge, the mighty Alpha King, a man feared and respected across the land, was not one to show weakness. Yet in that moment, as he watched Emily heal his son, There was a vulnerability in his eyes that he had not shown to anyone in years. His once hardened heart, so often clouded by the weight of leadership and the burdens of his crown, began to soften in the presence of the gentle Omega who had just saved his heir. He took a step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his words heavy with emotion. Emily glanced up at him, her expression soft but resolute. She didn't need his thanks, not for this. She had only done what felt right, what her heart had guided her to do. But seeing the raw gratitude in his eyes stirred something deep within her. She had spent so long feeling like an outsider, someone without a place in the world. Yet now, standing before this powerful Alpha King, she realized she might have just found her purpose. The air between them seemed to hum with an unspoken connection. As Emily continued her work, Cale's thoughts drifted. He had never imagined his life would bring him to this moment, to this humble cottage where an Omega would be the one to save his son. His heart, once cold and guarded, was beginning to thaw, but it wasn't just the boy he was thinking of anymore. No, it was her, Emily Stone, the woman who had dared to stand by his side, to help him when everything seemed lost. He had always believed that he was the one who protected those around him. But here was someone who had not only saved his son, but had also reminded him of the strength and kindness, the power of vulnerability. Cale watched as Emily stepped back from Lucas' side, wiping her hands on a cloth. She looked at him then, and for the first time, their eyes met not in formality or duty, but in something deeper, something that could not be denied. "He's going to be fine," Emily said softly, her voice calm, yet filled with certainty. Cale nodded, his chest tight with relief. He took a deep breath, stepping forward, not sure of what he intended to say, but feeling the need to speak nonetheless. "I never expected this," he said quietly. "I never expected you." Emily's eyes softened. "I did what was needed. Nothing more." But Cale could see it in her eyes, the flicker of something that told him she, too, felt the weight of the moment. There was no denying the pull between them. It was subtle at first, but with every glance, every word spoken, it grew stronger. In the silence that followed, the only sound was the soft rustling of the wind outside, as if the world itself had paused to witness the change unfolding between them. Cale's heart pounded in his chest as he considered what he was about to do. He had ruled for years with strength and power, but in this moment, it felt as though his destiny was no longer in his hands. His son had been saved, and it was thanks to Emily. It was not just his son he had come to care for, but her as well. Without another word, he reached out, his large hand gently brushing hers. The touch was electric, sending a shock of warmth through them both. Neither of them pulled away. Instead, Cale stepped closer, his breath steady but his heart racing. "You've saved him," Cale said, his voice low and sincere. "And in doing so, you've saved me too." Emily's heart fluttered in her chest as she met his gaze. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the world outside no longer mattering. It was just the two of them, connected by something beyond their understanding, yet undeniable. The Alpha King, once a figure of fear and power, now stood before her, vulnerable and open. She had healed his son, but in the process, she had unknowingly begun to heal him as well. The room was silent, save for the crackling of the fire, and Cale's voice broke the stillness again, softer this time. "Stay with us," he said. "Stay with me." His words were simple, yet they held the weight of everything he had never dared to ask for before. And in that moment, Emily knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The fire in Emily's cottage had burned low, casting long shadows against the stone walls. The soft, golden light from the hearth flickered in the quiet room, where Emily sat beside the cot where Lucas lay resting. Cale stood by the window, his silhouette framed by the soft light of the moon, his posture tense, though his heart felt lighter than it had in days. Lucas, the young pup who had been on the brink of death, now slept soundly, his breaths even, the fever broken. Cale couldn't help but look back at Emily. Her gentle hands had saved his son, but it was something deeper, something more unspoken, that had begun to settle between them. She had come into his life so unexpectedly, yet now, she was the calm in the storm he had been fighting for so long. "Thank you," Cale said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "You've done more than I could ever ask for." Emily looked up at him, her eyes meeting his with a quiet strength. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, She looked at Lucas, the boy who would one day carry the weight of his father's legacy. I did what I could, Emily replied simply. He's strong. He'll recover. But even as she spoke those words, Emily felt something shift. There was a bond forming between them, one she couldn't explain but couldn't ignore either. It wasn't just the healing, it was something else. Something that went deeper than just tending to a wounded pup. The night air grew cool as the fire continued to crackle softly, and Cale took a step closer to Emily. The distance between them felt smaller than it ever had, yet still, there was a barrier she couldn't quite cross. She was an Omega, humble and unassuming, while he was an Alpha King, a leader burdened with the weight of a kingdom. Emily, Cale began, his voice low, his words carrying the weight of a decision he had not yet fully understood. I've been a king for many years. I've fought wars, made alliances, and faced betrayals. But standing here with you, I realize I've never faced anything quite like this. Emily's heart fluttered in her chest. She knew the stakes. She had always known her place in the world, and it had never been by the side of an Alpha King. She had never dreamed of being noticed by someone like him. And yet, here she was, standing in his presence, as he spoke to her not as a ruler, but as a man who had found something, someone he hadn't expected. You saved my son, Cale continued, his words heavier now, filled with meaning. And in doing so, you saved me. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to speak so openly, to show such vulnerability. But there it was, in his eyes, a softness she hadn't anticipated from the fierce Alpha King. You're not like anyone I've ever met, Cale said, his gaze locked on hers, a rare sincerity in his voice. You've shown me something I thought I had lost. Hope. Emily wasn't sure what to say. She had healed his son, yes, but there was so much more that needed to be said. I didn't do it for you, or for anyone else, she said quietly. I did it because it was right. And that is exactly why I'm asking you to stay. Cale's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their unspoken truth. Emily looked up at him, surprised by the intensity of his gaze. Stay with us, Emily, Cale continued. Stay with me. Her heart skipped a beat, and for the briefest moment, she wondered if she could. Could she really stay? Could she become part of a world so different from the one she had known? The thought of it both terrified and exhilarated her. Emily began, but the words caught in her throat. She wasn't sure what she was feeling. All she knew was that standing here, in this quiet cottage, with Cale's steady gaze upon her, felt like a turning point. It felt like the beginning of something that would change everything. Cale stepped closer, his hand reaching out to gently touch hers. It was a simple touch, but it carried the weight of his request, his unspoken plea. I can't promise what will happen next, Cale said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. But I can promise you this. I will protect you. I will protect both you and Lucas. Emily's breath caught in her chest, and for a moment, all she could do was look at him, at the man who had once seemed so distant, so untouchable. Now he seemed so close, so human. And in that moment, she knew that whatever path she chose, it would be one she couldn't turn back from. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension, the kind that lingers in the air but can't quite be named. Emily stayed at the cottage, helping Lucas recover, but the bond between her and Cale continued to grow, unspoken yet undeniable. Every day, Emily found herself drawn closer to him, not by the power he wielded as the Alpha King, but by the man he was when they were alone, soft, vulnerable, and deeply grateful. The first time she saw him smile without the weight of his crown was the first time she truly saw him. It was a rare sight, one that made her heart flutter in a way she couldn't explain. They spent hours talking, sometimes about the future, sometimes about nothing at all. The more they shared, the more she realized how much they had in common. Both were burdened by expectations. Both were searching for something more than what their worlds had given them. But it wasn't just the conversations that brought them closer. It was the moments in between, when their hands brushed as they passed each other, when their eyes met in the quiet stillness of the night, when the unspoken understanding between them grew stronger. Emily had never imagined her life would take this turn. She had always been an outsider, a healer with no place to call home. But now, with the Alpha King by her side, she was beginning to wonder if perhaps she had found where she truly belonged. One evening, As the sun began to set and the air grew cool, Cale came to her with a quiet urgency. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. Emily looked at him, curiosity sparking in her eyes. "What is it?" "Come with me," he said simply, extending his hand. Without hesitation, she placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth of his touch seep into her skin. They walked through the forest together, the path illuminated by the fading light of the day. The sound of their footsteps was the only noise in the otherwise peaceful forest. After a short walk, they arrived at a small clearing, where the moonlight bathed the ground in silver. Cale stopped and turned to Emily, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "This is where I come when I need to think," he said, softly. "It's where I can be myself, away from the crown, away from the responsibilities." Emily looked around, taking in the serene beauty of the place. It was peaceful, the perfect spot to escape the weight of the world. But it was the way Cale looked at her that made her heart race. "I've never shared this place with anyone," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to share it with you." The sincerity in his words struck Emily deeply. She had never imagined that someone like him, someone so powerful, would seek out her company in such a personal way. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft with wonder. Cale smiled then, the smile that always made her heart skip a beat. "Because you've shown me a side of myself I didn't know was still there," he said quietly. "And I trust you." Emily's chest tightened at his words. She hadn't expected to hear that from him, not after everything that had happened. "I don't know what this means, Emily," Cale said, his voice vulnerable, something she rarely heard from him. "But I know I want to find out." Emily's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure what it all meant either. But she knew that in this moment, with Cale standing before her, she felt something she had never felt before, hope. She stepped closer to him, her hand still in his, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know what the future holds," she said softly, "but I want to find out with you." Cale's eyes softened, and he stepped forward, his other hand coming to gently touch her cheek. The touch was tender, almost as if he were afraid to break the fragile moment between them. And then, without a word, he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was soft, gentle, and full of unspoken promises. In that kiss, Emily felt everything she had been holding back. The fear, the uncertainty, the loneliness, melt away. It was as if the world around them disappeared, leaving only the two of them, standing in the moonlit clearing. When they finally pulled away, Cale's forehead rested against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I don't know what will happen next," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I know that whatever it is, I want to face it with you." Emily smiled, her heart full, as she closed the distance between them, her arms wrapping around him. "I'm here, Cale," she whispered. "I'm here with you." And in that moment, they both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The days that followed were filled with a growing sense of uncertainty. Emily and Cale spent more time together, but the more they shared, the more Emily felt the weight of her new reality. She had never imagined that a humble healer, a woman who had spent most of her life in the shadows, would find herself entwined with the fate of an alpha king. As much as she felt drawn to him, a part of her remained hesitant. What did it truly mean to be by his side? What would her life look like if she chose to stay? She had seen the weight of the crown on his shoulders, the burden of leadership, and the constant pressure of being a ruler. Cale had never known what it was like to live without that pressure. It had been his constant companion for as long as he could remember. Yet, when he was with Emily, he felt something he had not felt in years: peace. Her presence was a balm to his soul, a quiet assurance that everything could be different. He hadn't expected this, hadn't expected her. But now that she was here, he couldn't imagine his life without her. One evening, as the sky began to darken, Cale led Emily to the edge of the forest. The trees stood tall and silent around them, the only sound being the soft rustling of the leaves in the breeze. "I've been thinking," Cale said, his voice steady but filled with something deeper, something more vulnerable than he had shown her before. "About us." Emily looked at him, her heart fluttering at the weight of his words. "And what have you been thinking?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale stopped walking and turned to face her, his eyes searching hers as if he were looking for something. Something he couldn't quite name but felt deep within him. I've been thinking about what happens next, he said. About what we can build, about what we have, means. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had known. This moment would come, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Cale, she started, but he placed a finger gently on her lips, silencing her. Don't say anything yet, he murmured, his eyes filled with sincerity. Just listen. He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. I don't know what the future holds, Emily, he continued. But I know that whatever it is, I want you by my side. Not because of duty, not because of the crown, but because of you. His words, simple and sincere, took her breath away. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, truly seen. Not as a healer, not as an Omega, but as Emily, the woman who had captured his heart. I don't know if I can be the woman you need me to be, Emily said, her voice trembling. I don't know if I'm strong enough to stand by you in your world. Cale took her hand in his grip firm yet gentle. You are stronger than you realize, he said softly. And you don't have to stand beside me as an alpha's mate. You don't have to change who you are. I love you for who you are, Emily. That's all I need. Tears welled up in her eyes at his words, and for the first time, she felt a sense of belonging that she had never known before. It wasn't about the power, the titles, or the expectations. It was about them. Two people who had found each other in a world that had once seemed so vast and lonely. I want to stay, Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. I want to be with you, Cale, no matter what comes next. Cale's face softened with a smile, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close as if he were afraid to let her go. Then we'll face it together, he whispered, his voice filled with certainty. Together, we'll build something new, something that's just ours. In that moment, surrounded by the stillness of the forest, Emily knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, one that was uncertain, but one that she was ready to face with the Alpha King by her side. The days passed slowly, each one carrying a quiet sense of change. Emily and Cale grew closer, their bond solidifying with every passing hour. It was a strange thing, how quickly their lives had become intertwined. Emily had once thought she would always remain in the shadows, helping others from afar, never truly seen. But now, with Cale by her side, she felt something she had never imagined, belonging. It was not just the Alpha King that she had come to care for, but the people of his kingdom, the very land that had once seemed so foreign to her. Emily was learning that there was more to being a healer than just curing wounds. There was a deep connection to the land, to the people, to the very soul of the kingdom. And in that connection, she felt herself beginning to change, to grow in ways she had never expected. One afternoon, as the sun cast a golden light over the forest, Emily sat by the fire, her hands working with the herbs she had gathered earlier in the day. The peaceful sound of the wind rustling through the trees outside filled the air, but there was a sense of anticipation in the room as well. Cale had been distant lately, his mind preoccupied with matters of the kingdom. She could see it in his eyes, the burden he carried, the responsibility that weighed on him. It was a burden she had never fully understood until now, and it made her heart ache for him. But Emily was determined to be there for him, to share in his struggles, not just his victories. The door creaked open, and Cale entered the room, his posture rigid as always, but there was something in his gaze that softened when he saw her. It was that same quiet connection that had drawn them together in the first place, and it was still there, unspoken but felt deeply. Emily, he said, his voice low, almost hesitant. There is something I need to tell you. Emily looked up at him, her heart fluttering slightly at the seriousness in his tone. What is it? She asked, her voice soft, as though afraid to disturb the fragile moment. Cale hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, his eyes locking with hers. The kingdom is in turmoil, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of his words. There are factions within the pack that are beginning to question my rule. They don't believe I can lead us through the dark times that are ahead. Emily felt a pang of worry in her chest. She had known that Cale faced challenges as a leader, but hearing him speak so openly about the unrest in the kingdom made the reality of his position all the more daunting. What will you do? She asked, her voice steady despite the uncertainty she felt. Cale sighed, running a hand through his dark hair as he looked away. I don't know, he admitted, the vulnerability in his voice surprising her. I've tried everything I can think of, but it seems like no matter what I do, the kingdom is slipping further from my grasp. I fear for what might happen if I fail." Emily stood up, crossing the room to stand beside him. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle yet firm. "You're not alone in this, Cale," she said softly. "You've already done so much, and you've made it this far. Whatever happens, we will face it together." Cale looked down at her, his expression softening as he placed his hand over hers. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly, the words coming out before he could stop them. Emily shook her head, her gaze unwavering. "You don't have to deserve me, Cale," she replied. "You just need to be who you are. That's all I need." For a moment, they stood there, the weight of the world outside forgotten as they simply existed in that quiet, shared space. Cale took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice filled with a quiet gratitude. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "Always," she whispered. As the days wore on, the challenges in the kingdom only seemed to intensify. But Emily stood by Cale's side, her unwavering support a steadying force in the face of adversity. And through it all, she found herself growing in strength, not just as a healer, but as a woman who had found her place in a world she had never expected to be a part of. Together, they would face whatever came next, and with each passing day, their bond grew stronger, a force that neither of them could deny. The kingdom had been quiet for several weeks, and Emily found herself adjusting to the rhythm of life with Cale. The days were filled with small, tender moments, shared meals, walks through the forest, and long conversations that lasted into the night. Despite the quiet, there was an undercurrent of tension. Cale had been focused on his responsibilities, and Emily could see the weight of the crown settling heavily on his shoulders once again. His eyes, once bright with hope, now often carried a shadow of worry. Emily could feel the unease creeping into her own thoughts as well. The kingdom might have seemed peaceful, but the cracks were starting to show. The murmurs of unrest had not vanished. They had merely quieted for a time. Cale had told her more about the factions within the pack, the growing divisions that threatened to tear apart the fragile unity he had fought so hard to build. Emily had tried to reassure him, to remind him that he was not alone, but she knew that the challenges ahead would require more than just love and support. It would take strength, determination, and unity, a unity that seemed increasingly difficult to hold on to. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily and Cale stood side by side at the edge of the forest, looking out over the land. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and the sky above was painted with streaks of orange and pink. It was a peaceful sight, but there was an unease in the air that neither of them could ignore. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to just walk away from all of this?" Emily asked softly, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Cale glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said, his voice quiet. "But then I remember why I'm here, why I fight for this kingdom. It's not just for power or glory. It's for the people, for our future." Emily nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She, too, had come to understand the sacrifices that came with leadership. "I wish it were simpler," she said, her voice tinged with a sadness that mirrored his. "But I know that you'll do what's best, just as you always have." Cale turned to her then, his hand gently cupping her face as he looked into her eyes. "I don't know what's best anymore," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not sure I'm strong enough to carry this kingdom through the storm that's coming." Emily reached up to touch his hand, her heart aching at the vulnerability she saw in him. "You're stronger than you think, Cale," she said firmly. "And you don't have to carry it alone. We'll face whatever comes together. Always." He held her gaze for a long moment, as if searching for something in her eyes. Finally, he spoke again, his voice steadier than before. "I don't deserve you, Emily. I don't deserve your kindness, your strength." Emily smiled softly, her heart swelling with affection. "You don't have to deserve me, Cale," she said. "You just have to be you. And that's enough." For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind in the trees and the steady beating of their hearts. Then, Cale took a deep breath and nodded, his shoulders relaxing slightly, as if some of the weight had lifted, even if only for a moment. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done. For me, for Lucas, for this kingdom." Emily reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You don't have to thank me," she said softly. I'm here because I want to be. And I believe in you, Kale. I believe in us. The words hung in the air between them, a promise and a declaration of their bond. Despite the uncertainty of the future, despite the challenges they would face, Emily knew that as long as they stood together, they could overcome anything. Together, they would find a way to face the darkness, to build a future that was strong and lasting. As the night fell, they stood together, their hands intertwined, watching the stars appear in the sky above. The future was still uncertain, but Emily knew one thing for sure. They would face it, side by side. The tension in the kingdom had reached a boiling point, and despite the calm moments they shared, Emily could feel the storm brewing around them. Kale had become increasingly focused on the challenges within the pack. The whispers of rebellion had grown louder, and the factions threatening his rule were becoming bolder. The weight of the crown was heavier now than ever before, and Emily could see the strain it put on him. Yet, even in the midst of all the chaos, he still made time for her, still held her close in the quiet moments, as though he was determined to shield her from the world outside. It was a kindness that Emily had come to treasure, but she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. He was no longer the strong, confident leader he once was. His confidence had been replaced by doubt, and his once unshakable determination was now clouded by uncertainty. Emily knew that part of the reason he had distanced himself in recent days was because he did not want her to bear the burden with him. But she had already made up her mind. She was in this with him, through whatever came their way. One evening, as the moon hung high in the sky and the air had turned cool with the arrival of autumn, Kale walked into the cottage with a determined look in his eyes. Emily had been preparing a small meal, her hands moving instinctively as she chopped vegetables. But the moment she saw him, she knew something was different. "Emily," he said softly, his voice carrying a weight that made her heart skip a beat. She turned to face him, concern etched on her face. "What's wrong?" she asked, putting down the knife and stepping closer to him. "I've called a council meeting," Kale said, his gaze never leaving hers. "The factions are becoming more aggressive, and I need to act. There's no more time to wait." Emily's heart sank. She had feared this moment, the moment when the kingdom's turmoil would finally spill over, and it seemed it had come. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear rising within her. Kale paused for a moment, his eyes searching hers, as though weighing something important. "I need you to stay by my side," he said quietly. "I don't want you caught in the crossfire of whatever happens next. But I also need your strength, your wisdom. You are more than just a healer, Emily. You're the one thing in this world that makes me feel like I can still fight for what's right." The sincerity in his words took her by surprise. Emily had never seen Kale so vulnerable, so raw. She stepped forward, her hand reaching for his, and as her fingers brushed against his, she felt the connection between them deepen. "I'm with you, Kale," she said softly. "Always. You don't have to face this alone." He squeezed her hand gently, a look of relief crossing his features. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." The days leading up to the council meeting were filled with preparations. Emily spent her time gathering herbs and potions, readying herself for whatever role she would play in the coming days. She knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that there was no turning back. Her place was here, with Kale standing by his side as they faced the challenges that lay ahead. The night before the council meeting, Emily sat with Kale on the edge of the small balcony, overlooking the sprawling lands of the kingdom. The moonlight cast a soft glow on the world below, and for a moment, the world seemed at peace. But Emily could feel the tension in the air, the quiet before the storm. "Do you ever wish things could be different?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kale looked over at her, his gaze soft but filled with the weight of everything they were about to face. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low, "but I know that this is my duty. It's the path I've chosen, and I will do everything in my power to protect the kingdom and the people I love." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with affection for him. "And I'll be here, every step of the way," she said firmly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together." Kale turned to face her then, his eyes searching hers for a long moment before he spoke. "I don't deserve you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. Emily shook her head, her eyes meeting his with unwavering certainty. "You don't have to deserve me, Kale," she said softly. "You just have to be you. And that's more than enough." The words hung between them, a quiet promise that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. And in that moment, Emily knew that nothing would ever be the same. The path ahead would be uncertain, but with Cale by her side, she was ready for whatever came their way. The day of the council meeting arrived sooner than Emily had anticipated. The tension in the air was palpable as Cale prepared for the most critical discussion of his reign. Emily could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them both, but she also knew that this was a pivotal moment for Cale, for the kingdom, and for their future together. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the trees, Cale stood in front of the grand hall, his posture straight, his expression resolute. Emily stood beside him, her presence a quiet reassurance, but even she could see the doubt that lingered in the depths of his eyes. Despite everything he had achieved, the uncertainty of the future still loomed over him like a dark cloud. "Are you ready?" Emily asked softly, her hand resting gently on his arm. Cale turned to her, his eyes softening as they met hers. For a brief moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift, and he gave her a small but sincere smile. "I'm ready because you're here with me," he replied. Emily's heart swelled at his words, and she nodded. "We'll face it together, no matter what happens." The council hall was filled with the murmurs of the kingdom's most powerful leaders, the room heavy with the sense of history in the making. Emily and Cale entered together, the door closing behind them with a quiet finality. The room fell silent as the council members took their seats, their eyes fixed on the Alpha King and his companion. The factions that had been growing bolder now stood at the forefront, their discontent clear in the cold expressions that greeted Cale. The air was thick with tension, and Emily could almost feel the collective anxiety of the room as they awaited Cale's words. Cale took a deep breath, his chest rising with a quiet determination. He knew that this was not just about the kingdom. It was about his future, his leadership, and the future of the people he had sworn to protect. As the Alpha King, he had fought for respect, for stability, but now it seemed as though all that he had worked for was on the verge of unraveling. "Thank you all for gathering today," Cale began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of his authority. "I know that there are many concerns, many voices calling for change. But change cannot come through division and dissent. It must come through unity." There was a stir among the council members, some nodding in agreement, others glaring at him with open disdain. But Cale continued, his gaze unwavering. "I have given my life to this kingdom. I have fought, I have bled, and I have made decisions that were not easy, all to ensure that our future remains strong. But I will not sit idly by and let that future be torn apart by those who wish to see it crumble." Emily could feel the power in his words, and she knew that this was the moment when his leadership would truly be tested. She had never seen him more vulnerable, yet more determined. "I will do what I must to protect this kingdom, and I will not allow anyone, no matter their station, to destroy what we have built. But I also know that we cannot continue to live in fear of the future. We must look forward, together." The room was silent as his words settled, and for a moment, Emily thought she saw something shift in the eyes of the council members. They were still wary, still skeptical, but the quiet strength in Cale's voice had cut through the tension like a blade. "We face difficult times ahead," Cale continued. "But I believe in this kingdom. I believe in its people. And I believe that together, we can rise above the challenges before us. But we must stand united. I will not lead a divided kingdom." His voice was resolute, and for the first time in a long while, Emily saw the spark of the Alpha King he had once been, the leader who had risen above his past to claim his throne. The silence in the room stretched on for a few more moments, but then a voice broke through the stillness. "The Alpha King speaks the truth," one of the council members, a respected elder, said, his voice low but firm. "We have seen the strength of his leadership, and we must stand with him, for the sake of the kingdom." Emily could feel the shift in the room, the reluctant acceptance of Cale's leadership. It wasn't unanimous, and there would still be those who opposed him, but in that moment, it seemed as though the winds of change had shifted in his favor. As the council meeting continued, Emily stayed by Cale's side, her presence a steady force in the sea of uncertainty. She knew that the battle was far from over, that there would be more challenges ahead. But as she looked at Cale, standing tall before the council, she knew one thing for certain. They were stronger together, and no matter what the future held, they would face it side by side.